Well, hello everyone and greetings. Welcome to Bible study at the First Baptist Church of Philadelphia. My name is Pastor James, and I am delighted to be here with each of you this evening. I see Georgina, hi Georgina, and I see Dee, hi Dee, and I see Jerry, hi Jerry. It's great to see you all tonight, and anyone else who's hopping in. We're going to be digging in, continuing our dig in, really, to the Gospel of Luke. And so last week we took a step back for Holy Week to focus on the resurrection, but now we're jumping back into it. So we're at Luke chapter 9, verse 28 is where we're starting off, right at what's often called the Transfiguration, although you'll find that Luke does not use this word. Before we do, let us bring ourselves before the Lord. Gracious God, we thank you for blessing us with this day and this time of fellowship tonight, Lord. Bless us that we be receptive to what it is that you're telling us. Help me not say anything that you wouldn't have me say, Lord, but instead help us to be anointed by your presence and your understanding, Lord. We love you and we thank you. Thank you for blessing us with this time tonight. In your name we do pray. Amen. Okay, so we're going to jump right into it. Luke chapter 9, verse 28. There we go. About 8 days after Jesus said this, he took Peter, John, and James with him and went up onto the mountain to pray. As he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. Two men, Moses and Elijah, appeared in glorious splendor, talking with Jesus. They spoke about his departure, which he was about to bring to fulfillment at Jerusalem. Peter and his companions were very sleepy, but when they became fully awake, they saw his glory and the two men standing with him. As the men were leaving Jesus, Peter said to him, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what he was saying. While he was speaking, a cloud appeared and covered them, and they were afraid as they entered the cloud. A voice came from the cloud saying, "This is my son, whom I have chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, they found that Jesus was alone. The disciples kept this to themselves and did not tell anyone at the time what they had seen. So you're probably familiar with this story in some way. It's celebrated every year in a lot of traditions, particularly Orthodox traditions. This is what's called the Transfiguration, and this is language that Matthew uses in his Gospel and Mark uses in his for this event. Luke doesn't use the phrase transfigure, and there's a reason for that probably. We remember the audiences of Luke, right? And we remember the audiences of Matthew and of Mark. So Matthew is speaking to a Jewish audience, new converts. Mark is really speaking to a Jewish audience. Luke is talking probably to unchurched, to Gentiles, to people who are unfamiliar with these Jewish traditions. And to use the word transfigure would conjure up images that might recall pagan miracle workers. And so it's very likely that Luke doesn't use this word for that reason, because there are miracle workers in Hellenistic traditions. To the Jews, they might say pagan traditions, where the worker is said to transfigure themselves. And so Luke is probably avoiding this language. But to Matthew and Mark, they're speaking to Jewish audiences, so they can use what words they choose. So this is called the Transfiguration. And why? Because Jesus, his glory is revealed in a new, powerful, and divine way. So about 8 days after Jesus said this, we read that he took Peter, John, and James with him and went up to the mountain to pray. Now, what mountain is this? When we go to Israel next year, you'll visit Mount Tabor. Mount Tabor is the traditional site of the Mount of the Transfiguration. It's probably not the most likely site, though, because it's far from Caesarea Philippi, which is a cool place that you'll also go to. And it's not very tall. It's only 1,000 feet tall. And at the time of Jesus, it had a military garrison on top. So it's not the most likely. Many believe that it's actually Mount Hermon, which you will also kind of visit. Mount Hermon is snow-capped. At least it was when I was there. And you really have to go up to get up there. And there's a ski resort up there now. This is much closer to Caesarea Philippi, where Jesus is coming from, so they could have made the walk. It's also much more impressive. Instead of being 1,000 feet in height, it's 8,000 feet, right? So it's, did I write that down? It's over 9,000 feet. I'm glad I did write that down. So there's a significant difference here. So they're probably going up Mount Hermon. And so we have Peter, James, and John. Why Peter, James, and John? Where are the rest? Well, remember a few chapters ago, Jesus went into Jairus' house. It should be Jairus, by the way. Went into Jairus' house, and he only allowed for Peter, James, and John to come with him. Very interesting. There's a lot of theories about this. Let me propose this, however. Throughout this whole scene, we have glimpses of allusions to the Old Testament. We have Moses, we have Elijah, we have a mountain, we have a cloud, we have a theophany. Theophany is the visible manifestation of God's presence. There, now you sound like scholars. Isn't this beautiful? We have theophany. Where else do we encounter this? That's right, Mount Sinai in Exodus. We recall when Moses ascends to see God, he can only bring with him 3 companions. This is off the top of my head. It's, I'm not even going to say. It's Abinah, Nab, and one other. Someone look it up and write it in the comments. Grandma Kay. Kay is my grandmother, by the way. Kay, if you could look that up, I would love that. So the 3 companions that go up, or actually I think they're descending from Mount Sinai with Christ. And just write that in the comments. Whoever gets it first, I'll give you a thumbs up. So there are 3. Here we have the same thing. Jesus with Peter, John, and James. And so they go up to the mountain to pray. Some have pointed to the importance of prayer in this section. Luke likes to attach Jesus' encounters with God with prayer. And people are very quick, I don't know if they're very quick, but people notice this. In order for, before Jesus engages with God in meaningful ways that others can see, he tends to pray first. Food for thought, friends. And as they were praying, the appearance of his face changed. Now, the other Gospels, the more Jewish ones, or the ones who are speaking to a more Jewish audience, they use the word transfigured. Here, Luke uses changed. And his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. Also, he doesn't say white clothes here. I'm just double checking. No, he doesn't. I didn't think so. At this time in Jewish thinking, we start to see in Jewish apocryphal literature angels wearing all white, divine figures wearing white, images of God are presented as all in white, and that continues throughout the New Testament. There's a theological significance to it, I'm certain. But it's interesting that here Luke doesn't say it's all white, but rather he says that they became as bright as a flash of lightning. 2 men, Moses and Elijah, appear in glorious splendor talking with Jesus. Okay, so now we're getting back to Moses and Elijah. What's the deal with Moses and Elijah anyway? Why are they here? It's interesting. I'll tell you why I think they're here. There's a bunch of theories. I think that this one carries the most veracity. There was strong belief, in a Messiah, but how the Messiah would look really different. We talk about this a lot. No need to dive into it too much. But there were those who believed that Moses would come back. In fact, there are non-biblical Jewish traditions that Moses was still alive. We read that God buried Moses. And that was the Jewish tradition. So some believe that Moses was even still walking the earth and that he was going to come. He is kind of the quintessential prophet to the Jewish people. And then you have Elijah. And of course, Elijah doesn't have a natural death. And so it's presupposed that he's still alive. And in Jewish traditions, even today, some rabbis say that he is wandering the earth, helping rabbis, saving them when they need to be saved, that kind of thing. And at Seder feast, you leave an empty chair for Elijah for when he does come, which is really important, right? Because he's bringing in these eschatological promises. Eschatological, just one time we'll go over the word eschatology. Ology, study of, it's comprised of two words, eschaton and telos, eschatology, and then the study of eschaton being the end, and telos also being the end, but two different types of end. End in terms of purpose, telos, and end in terms of time, eschaton. And you combine these two together and you get eschatology. So when I say eschatology, we're just talking about the end times. And these often carry hosts of traditions and beliefs. Oh, I'm seeing your comment, Kay. No, Peter, James, and John, I am talking about them. They are, many suggest that Peter, James, and John are symbolic of the three that descended with Moses down Mount Sinai in Exodus. And I don't know what chapter in Exodus that would be. Do I have it in my lexicon? I don't. It's somewhere in Exodus. So anyway, we have these two figures coming, and with Moses and Elijah then, well, it rules them out of the picture in this story as the Messiah that's to come. Because here they're serving Jesus. And there's more. We'll dig into that in a moment. They spoke about his departure. This is in verse 31. This is important. So I'm reading out of a New International Version. Departure is the word that's there. I'm curious as to what words you have there. The Greek word, the Koine Greek word there is exodo. Go ahead and say exodo. Great. It sounds a lot like a word you probably know, a Hebrew word, a word that sounds like the second book in the Tanakh, or the Pentateuch, or the first 5 books of the Bible, and that is Exodus. Yet another allusion to the Exodus. And they spoke about his departure. And it's also interesting that exodo could be used in different ways. So it could mean to depart, but it also could mean to die. Both are appropriate here. Which one is Luke pointing to? And is it an either or is he pointing to both meanings? That Jesus is, yes, venturing on his departure towards Jerusalem, which is where Moses is going. Now, they don't know that Jerusalem, New Salem is the translation, which is at the time inhabited, is going to be their holy mountain, but they do know that it's in the promised land. And here Jesus is facing his feet towards Jerusalem as well, which he was about to bring to fulfillment at Jerusalem. So there we go. Peter and his companions were very sleepy, but when they became fully awake, they saw his glory and the two men standing with them. And as the men were leaving Jesus, Peter said to him, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." And then Luke says, in parentheses, not in parentheses, we put it in parentheses in English, he did not know what he was saying. So this is kind of comical, right? The disciples, they're drowsy, they're overcome. I don't know. Is it because of nature? Is it because of God's will? I'm not sure. But whatever it be, they wake up and Jesus, they're in this like scene, like a dream, and it reminds me almost of Jacob's vision at Bethel. With the descending angels, it feels so real. We're not given the impression, by the way, that this isn't real, although some have presupposed it. But whatever it be, they wake up, and here is Jesus talking with these figures. And Jesus looks a little different, right? He has transfigured into something which they can't quite articulate, and they know that this is Moses and Elijah, and it's on their heart, apparently, that this is the case because they've never seen them physically before, right? And Peter says this weird thing: let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah, which is an odd thing to say, right? Because these are, of course, Moses and Elijah. we can say that Peter's really tired, he doesn't know what he's doing. And Luke seems to point to that. He did not know what he was saying, right? He's out of it. He's loopy. He's wonky. Some have said that maybe he's mimicking the Feast of Tabernacles that the Israelites would hold in the wilderness during their 40 years of wandering, and they would set up these little booths, right, made out of sticks, and they were just like little wooden tents. And some have said that maybe this is an allusion to that. I don't know. But it seems like from Luke's language, it's just like he's got into some silliness. He doesn't know how to comprehend what is going on. This is crazy, right? And this is just the beginning. While he was speaking, a cloud appeared and enveloped them, and they were afraid as they entered the cloud. Again, our imagery goes to God at Sinai with the cloud descending, in which Moses must go into. And out of the cloud comes blasts of trumpets, they say. Many believe that, and flashes of lightning, which actually, cautious to do this, but if we were to guess, it looks like it's volcanoes going on, which isn't uncommon for the terrain at the time. I mean, it's not super common, but it's not unheard of. And so many believe that Mount Sinai was, wherever Mount Sinai may be, because we don't know where Mount Sinai is, by the way, it was volcanic and explosive. That may or may not be the case, I don't know. But that's this is the imagery here. And now it's happening to them. And so it's understandable that they're afraid. There's a tradition that you can't look upon the face of God lest you die. Moses, when he speaks with God, God puts his hand over the cleft of the rock so that Moses can't see him face to face. And into the same situation, we read in Chronicles, 2 Chronicles, I believe, maybe it's 2 Chronicles 13? 1 Chronicles 13? Sorry, guys. I'm good, I'm not that good. We see, seek his face. So there's this one call to seek God's face, and another that says that if you do encounter God's face, you will die because you cannot handle the glory. And so it's understanding that this is petrifying, just absolutely, scary to them. And so we understand that they're afraid. And a voice came from the cloud saying, "This is my son whom I have chosen. Listen to him." We recall Jesus' baptism earlier in Luke and elsewhere in the other Gospels, and the dove descends. And there's a voice. And depending on what gospel you read and interpretation, Jesus hears it, the crowd hears it, John hears it, whomever. But we hear God say, "This is my son with whom I am well pleased." Similar accounts. Now, this is deeper than that, too. This has Old Testament roots. Let's go to Isaiah chapter 42. Isaiah is where we get... Isaiah is a complicated book, kind of. It's also beautiful. It spans a large period of time, which has made it kind of enigmatic to scholars. It spans about 250 years, give or take. So who is Isaiah and who's writing, and it gets confusing. But the middle parts of Isaiah are where we pull a lot of it's confusing to say because it's where we come across passages that allude to the Messiah. We come to the suffering servant discourse, which is chapter 40 through 55, and famously we have Isaiah 53 is taken as kind of a direct quote about Jesus. Now, what's interesting is we see these as obvious. In Jewish traditions, they don't see these as messianic. And if they have, is up for debate. It depends on the schools and the teachers. And Judaism is less pluralistic now than it once was. Because after the destruction of Jerusalem, all Judaism kind of went down Pharisaic lines. And it's still diverse, of course, and you have Hasidic and Reformed and everything in between on the other sides. The Reconstructionists, but there's still not as much diversity as there once was. Same with Christianity too, actually, which is interesting. And so we come to Isaiah 42, and we read this. Here is my servant whom I uphold, my chosen one in whom I delight. This is my son whom I have chosen, listen to him. In Jesus' baptism, this is my chosen in whom I delight. They're all alluding to this. Here is my servant whom I uphold, my chosen one in whom I delight. I will put my spirit on him, and he will bring justice to the nations. He will not shout or cry out or raise his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out. In faithfulness he will bring forth justice. He will not falter or be discouraged till he establishes justice on earth. In his law the islands will put their hope. Interesting. Now, when we're reading this in Isaiah, the servant that is to come is assumed by many to be, especially in modern interpretations of the belief in Jewish circles, contemporary interpretations, it's talking about not a single person, but the nation of Israel. To Christian scholars, they say that, yes, the author of Isaiah was writing about Israel, who is supposed to be the light the light to the world. And this is, we come all through the prophets, really, this is kind of the emphasis, that Israel has this destiny to be a light to the world. And it sounds like they're talking about Gentiles, which may or may not be the case. It depends who you ask. But Christian scholars are quick to say that where Israel failed through their repeated apostasy, Jesus came and fulfilled. That's always sat well with me. I'm interested to hear your thoughts. I wish we were all in a group so we could go down this together. But anyway, so this is all to say that, or to put in their minds, that Jesus is the fulfillment of these messianic promises. So while he was speaking, a cloud appeared and enveloped them, and they were afraid. A voice came from the cloud saying, "This is my son, whom I have chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, they found that Jesus was alone. The disciples kept this to themselves and told no one at the time what they had seen. Well, Jesus has told them many times not to tell what they had seen. They don't even need the message anymore, right? They get it. No one's going to believe this. They're not going to understand it. And here's something that's important. When the voice had spoken, they found that Jesus was alone. If there was questions about the messiahship of Jesus, they're likely gone for Peter, John, and James. I say that with more optimism than maybe we can express through biblical readings of people who constantly fall short of the expectations that we'd expect. In this very chapter, we'll see that right after this, they're already messing up again. But that's just what disciples do. And, we shouldn't be hard on them because that's what we do. We are so much like the disciples. I totally get why God chose these men, right? Moses is not the Messiah to come. Elijah is not the Messiah to come. Both of them speak to Jesus, the one whom the Lord has chosen, his son. In the Old Testament, when we talk about the Son of God, we're talking about the people of Israel. But here, God is calling Jesus his son. This is huge. We're used to this language. We call Jesus the Son of God. This is huge. Jesus had been referring to himself as Son of Man. And I think we've talked about, that's a phrase used in Daniel, in the book of Daniel, most prominently. And it carried a lot of eschatological, end times, weight for the Jewish people. Jesus' sonship is tied up with the divine. And when the others leave, it's just Jesus alone, reflecting the humble ministry that Jesus holds. If we have... I'm trying to think who I read this from, but I thought it was an interesting idea. I think it was Garland. Garland's commentary. If we have if we have any hopes of a triumphant, victorious, warlike victory of the cross, it's gone here. We see the humility, yet again, of Jesus' character, a humility that is shocking. Son of God, beloved, chosen, in whom God delights. So humble, so lowly, and by choice. Interesting idea that we'll talk about in a moment. Moving on. The next day, when they came down from the mountain, a large crowd met him. A man in the crowd called out, "Teacher, I beg you to look at my son, for he is my only child. A spirit seizes him and he suddenly screams. It throws him into convulsions so that he foams at the mouth. It scarcely ever leaves him and is destroying him. I begged your disciples to drive it out, but they could not." "You unbelieving and perverse generation," Jesus replied, "how long shall I stay with you and put up with you? Bring your son here." Even while the boy was coming, the demon threw him to the ground in a convulsion. But Jesus rebuked the impure spirit, healed the boy, and gave him back to his father. And they were all amazed at the greatness of God. While everyone was marveling at all that Jesus did, he said to his disciples, "Listen carefully to what I am about to tell you. The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men." But they did not understand what this meant. It was hidden from them, so they did not grasp it. And they were afraid to ask him about it. I am looking at the time, and I see that we're coming to a close, but I can finish this quickly. Bear with me here. So the next day they come down a mountain, and a large crowd meets him. No surprise, large crowds are always meeting Jesus and his disciples, always to find this healing, to see what's going on with this miracle worker who's shaking the ground in some powerful ways in quiet Galilee. A man in the crowd called out, "Teacher, I beg you to look at my son, for he is my only child. A spirit seizes him and he suddenly screams. It throws him into convulsions so that he foams at the mouth. It scarcely ever leaves him and is destroying him. I begged your disciples to drive it out, but they could not." We have a man who has an only son, and of course by now you've been in this study, you know how important sons are. They carry on the family legacy. They care for you when you're old. They give you security. They're absolutely essential, particularly in a society where women can't own land and have no rights, essentially. This is his only son. And he keeps on going to these convulsions and foaming at the mouth. Many have been quick to link this to epilepsy, but there is a caution with linking ancient diseases ambiguously described with modern diagnoses. So there's calm. There's a little hesitancy there in doing such a thing, and it's okay. And it may be epilepsy, but we just don't know. And Jesus says, "O believing and perverse generation, how long shall I stay with you and put up with you? Bring your son here." See, the answer for Jesus is always a faith question. It's always an unbelieving question. And so we get the impression, too, that he's a little irked with his disciples. This may or may not be the case. Some scholars say it's very strong. I'm torn. I think it's very likely that Jesus is mad at his disciples because he just told them they could drive out all types of demons, and they're not. Why? Because they lack faith. That seems to be a consistent theme, and it was common in these times for miracle workers to have disciples, but the miracle worker did not expect the disciples to be able to do the miracle working. So Jesus is an exception here. He says, "No, because of my authority and my name, you too will cast out demons." Well, it's not working here, and Jesus says it's a faith problem. And even while the boy was coming, the demon threw him to the ground in a convulsion. But Jesus rebuked the evil spirit, healed the boy, and gave him back to his father, and they were all amazed at the greatness of God. Generally, exorcisms were done by invoking the names of higher powers, even of higher demons. It said that if you have a stronger demon, you can get out the lesser demon. They would stick roots up noses. They would invoke pain. They would do all sorts of things. Jesus, with a word, with a rebuke, sends the demon out. And they were all amazed at the greatness of God. So this was pretty extraordinary to the onlookers, right? Let's not minimalize it because of the overencumbrance of miracles. This crowd was amazed at the greatness of God. And notice how they link it to God, right? Jesus is good about this, linking things not to him, but always to God. While everyone was marveling at all that Jesus did, he said to his disciples, "Listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you. The Son of Man is going to be betrayed into the hands of men." But they did not understand what this meant. It was hidden from them, so they did not grasp it, and they were afraid to ask him about it. So the crowd is marveling, and Jesus says to his disciples, perhaps within earshot of them, perhaps not, "Listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you. The Son of Man is going to be betrayed into the hands of men." My translation says betrayed, and that's okay. The word is epidostimoi. Yes, I believe that's it. And it can mean betray. It can mean to hand over. So, different translations say different things. But it's believed that Judas is within earshot. And maybe the betrayal is more what's alluded here. That's probably why New International Version chose to use the word betray into the hands of men. But then we read, but they did not understand what this meant. It's still inconceivable of them that the Messiah would die. And we should give them grace here. There's so much cultural messianic baggage in their traditions that it's hard to break from. They have a pretty developed idea of what the Messiah should look like. Not as developed as our idea of Jesus. We have the benefit of hindsight. But they have a pretty developed idea, and Jesus is not fitting this. And yet it's also clear that the one whom God just spoke to about them in front of Moses and Elijah is the chosen one. So they're very confused. The Son of Man is going to be betrayed into the hands of men, but they did not understand what this meant. And it's not all their fault, for we read it was hidden from them, so they did not grasp it, and they were afraid to ask him about it. We'll stop there. There's one little section, Who Will Be the Greatest, which we'll cover next week, and then we actually move into a whole new pericope. Jesus now is moving towards Jerusalem, and we'll see, and we're not surprised to see even at this moment that even after all of this, there's still a lot of discipleship that has to go on. He still has disciples who are unable to drive out these demons because of a lack of faith. And as we'll see next week, he still has disciples who are arguing about being the greatest and the least, when Jesus just showed them that it was all about humility. So there's a lot to be done. And so we'll encounter next week the beginning of the travel narrative. And it's about 10 chapters of discipleship teaching as Jesus moves towards his final week. But we'll encounter that next week. This was so much fun. I had no idea I was going to ramble so much about the Transfiguration. It seems that you hit a spot where I'm passionate about. So I love you all. It's so great to see you, Georgina and Dee and Jerry and Joe and Kay and Victoria. Oh, guys, you all bless my heart so much. I love you. Can I pray us out? All right. Gracious God, thank you for blessing us with this time tonight. May you continue to work on us. May you continue to inspire us. May we continue to encounter you through Scripture and through our communities and through our experiences, Lord, with you. We love you and we thank you for all that you do and all that you are. Bless us this day, Lord. In your name we do pray. Amen. All right. I love you all so dearly, and I can't wait to see you guys again sometime soon. If you ever want to talk, you know how to reach me in the